Okay, so you know how there are just some things in society you think like are pretty much set in stone, like how we handle something as big as education in this country. It seems like one of those things.
Right.
But then like, whoa, hold on a second, because there's this headline going around about dismantling the entire Department of Education. And it's like, whoa, wait, what would that even look like?
Yeah, that's a pretty big idea. Like, no question about it. We're not talking about just like changing a little rule here or there. This is like asking, should the federal government even be involved in like how our kids are taught in school at all?
Yeah.
And because like everyone's affected by education, figuring out what might happen if you do this is really important for everyone.
Absolutely, because on the one hand, it sounds good, right? Like giving power to the states, cutting through all the, bureaucratic red tape, all that. It sounds like it could be more efficient. But then you start thinking, wait a minute, what exactly does the Department of Education even do? And what happens if you just like pull that out? So for anyone who wants to like go deeper than just the headlines, and really figure out what the impact could be without getting lost in like tons of reports and stuff, that's exactly what we're doing today.
Yep.
We're going to break down this executive order and really get to the bottom of, is this a good thing for education or is it going to hurt students and the help they need?
Yeah, and to help us sort through all this, we're looking at this discussion called E19, Trump's push to dismantle the Department of Education, empowering states or undermining students.
Right.
It lays out the different sides really well, gives us a good base to understand everything.
Okay, so let's get right into it. What's the main reason people want to get rid of the Department of Education? Like, what's the big idea?
I'd say the big thing is this idea of local control.
Okay.
So, like, decisions about education should be made by the people closest to the kids, like parents, teachers, local school boards, people who really know what their students and communities need.
Right, that makes sense. Like a classroom out in like rural Vermont's going to have different needs than one in Chicago, right?
Exactly. And the argument is that states can understand and handle those different needs better than the federal government. Plus, they say state and local governments pay most of the cost of education anyway. So they figure if they're paying, they should be the ones calling the shots.
Right. So matching who's in charge of who's paying makes sense. Okay, so we got giving power back to the states and aligning control with funding. What's the next big argument for getting rid of the department?
The next one is all about cutting down on bureaucracy and what a lot of people see as like wasted government money.
Okay.
So they're saying the Department of Education has gotten too big and complicated over time and that it's actually making things less efficient.
And we're talking about an agency that's like spent trillions of dollars over the years, right?
Oh, yeah, huge amount of money. And the people who want to get rid of it are like, hey, despite all that spending, our students aren't doing that much better compared to other countries. So their thinking is if we shrink the federal government's role in education, we can cut out some of that administrative stuff and send more money straight to the schools and classrooms where it'll actually make a difference.
Right, so fewer layers, more direct impact. Okay, now school choice is always a big topic in education. How does getting rid of the department tie into that?
Well, a lot of conservatives believe that when the federal government gets too involved in education, it actually stifles innovation and pushes this like one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't work for everyone. So by shifting power back to the states, they're hoping it'll open things up for different types of schools and more school choice options.
So, like more charter schools, maybe more vouchers for private schools, and even more flexibility for homeschooling, all happening at the state level.
Exactly. The idea is that if different types of schools have to compete with each other, it'll force them to improve, and parents will have more options to choose from.
Right? More competition, better quality in theory. And this push to dismantle the department seems to be connected to that parents' rights movement that's been getting bigger lately, too, right?
Oh, definitely. A lot of people see this executive order as being in line with that movement, especially the part about parents feeling like they didn't have enough say in things like remote learning and curriculum during the pandemic. This is being presented as a way to give parents more control over their kids' education.
So, for those parents who felt like their concerns weren't being heard, this is seen as a way to empower them. And there's also that part about specific types of curriculum being banned, right?
Right, the order specifically says no federal money can go to programs that promote diversity equity, or what they call gender ideology. This is obviously appealing to a big group of people who are worried about these topics being taught in schools.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about local control, less bureaucracy, school choice, and parents' rights. There's one more big area our source mentions, which is managing student loans.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. The Department of Education is currently holding like $1.8 trillion in federal student loans.
Wow.
And a lot of people think the department has done a bad job of handling the repayment process for all those loans.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of money, and student loan repayment can be super complicated. So the idea is to maybe move the responsibility for all those loans to a different agency like the Small Business Administration or the Treasury Department.
Exactly. They're thinking those agencies might be better at managing huge financial portfolios like that. But of course, the question is, are they really ready to take on something that big, and what would it mean for the people who have those loans?
Right. Good point. All right, so that's a pretty good overview of the arguments for dismantling the Department of Education, but we know there's another side to this story. What are some of the worries people have about getting rid of the department?
One of the biggest worries is that it could hurt low-income students and students in rural areas.
Okay.
So the Department of Education gives out about $18 billion a year through Title I grants.
And just to remind everyone, Title I is specifically for schools with a lot of low-income students, right? It's supposed to help make things more fair for them.
Exactly. And that money is often used for things like basic academic help teacher training and other programs in schools that might not have enough money otherwise.
Right.
The concern is if we get rid of the Department of Education and that money gets distributed in different ways, it might not go to the schools that need it most, or it might be harder for them to get. Especially rural schools, they often rely heavily on that federal support just to provide basic education.
So we could see schools that are already struggling facing even bigger challenges. What about students with disabilities? The Department of Education plays a big role there too, right?
For sure, the department oversees the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEAL,
Right.
which gives about $15 billion to support the education of 7.4 million students with disabilities all over the country. But it's not just about the money. It's about making sure that states follow the rules that are supposed to guarantee these students a good public education.
So the worry is that if there's no federal agency specifically in charge of enforcing IDEA, states might start putting special education on the back burner or not give it enough money, and those protections that are in place now could weaken.
Yeah, that's a big concern. And our source mentions that there's even a proposal in this Project 2025 to move the oversight of special education to the Department of Health and Human Services. And some people are worried that that would just make things more complicated and less effective.
Right, so less coordination potentially. So that's a really worrying thought. Okay, now another big thing the Department of Education does is protects civil rights in schools, right?
Yeah, they have an Office for Civil Rights that does that.
Right.
They investigate complaints about discrimination based on things like race, gender disability, things like that. They're really an important part of making sure everyone has equal access to education.
And it sounds like the plans to dismantle the department would really affect that part.
Definitely. The plan is to close 7 out of the 12 regional offices of the Office for Civil Rights and lay off almost half of their staff. One person who used to work there even said that these cuts could pretty much stop most of their investigations.
Wow.
It raises some serious questions about how they're going to protect civil rights in schools without enough people to do the work.
That's a pretty big warning. Okay, let's go back to student loans for a second. We talked about maybe having a different agency manage them, but it sounds like there are also concerns about messing things up if there isn't a clear plan in place.
Exactly. Like we said, it's a massive amount of money, and it's already complicated to manage. There are reports that both the Treasury Department and the Small Business Administration don't even want to take over those loans. So if the Department of Education goes away and no one's leaded to step in, it could be a total mess. People might not be able to make their payments. Things could get really disrupted.
Right, so potentially making a bad situation even worse. Okay, and finally, let's talk about the big picture of accountability and oversight in education.
Yeah, that's key. The Department of Education keeps track of how states are using federal money for education, and they collect data on how students are doing.
Right.
That data is super important for understanding which schools and states are doing well and which ones need help, and it helps hold everyone accountable.
So if we get rid of that federal oversight and data collection, what could happen in the long run?
Well, someone named Lee James from the Center for American Progress said it could mean a loss of expertise, data collection, oversight, and accountability.
Right.
So basically, the worry is that without the federal government involved, states could end up having totally different levels of quality in their education systems, and the differences between states could get even bigger.
Yeah, so a much more uneven playing field across the country. So we've gone really deep into this issue, and it seems like the big question is getting rid of the Department of Education a much needed change that will make things better, or is it a dangerous move that could hurt students and mess up the whole public education system?
Yeah, it's a tough question with no easy answers.
Definitely. So as you're listening to this and thinking about all these arguments and what might happen, I want to leave you with this question to think about. What's the one thing that the Department of Education does now that you think absolutely has to stay at the federal level, and why?
Yeah, good question.